before I share my screen, I wanted to ask you to, yeah, that's what you're writing about. Irina asked me to tell you that the bot will check your homework again on Monday. So please note that if you haven't completed your homework until your previous homeworks until the last deadline, then we ask you to complete them now within this week. And on Monday, your homework will be checked again. So that's some kind of a second chance for you to improve your homework and finally have it checked. So today we will talk about the Flexbox and grid layouts closely. So we have talked about them a little bit on our lecture about the layouts, but now we will talk about them in details. So we will start with the Flexbox presentation, and then we will, I guess, take a little break, and we will proceed with the grid layout after that. Let me start the presentation. So the CSS Flexbox. The agenda for the first part of our lecture is that we will explain why the Flexbox model is needed, what it is exactly, and we will take a look at some properties that we use for the parent element and for the children elements of the Flexbox model. So here is what it looks like. We have some kind of a container and we have some elements inside that we want to place somehow in a column, in a row, or somehow else. And Flexbox model teaches us how we can do that. So why Flexbox? Before this technology was invented, we used floats and positioning. You already know about what these technologies are. They could work, but their functionality was limited, and they had a lot of side effects that developers were trying to avoid. And here you can see some design, some goals that developers were trying to achieve, but which were not possible with these tools like floats or positioning. So for example, we could not vertically center a block inside its parent, or we couldn't make all the children take up an equal amount with width and height, or we could not create a multiple column layout with the same height. So if, for example, if we have a container with some columns with text, and this text takes up different height, it was difficult. So we could do this with the Flexbox and the ClearFix tool, but it was well, pretty difficult and took a lot of effort. So with Flexbox, this could be much easier. So this is also what the Flexbox looks like. So for example, we have a container with 3 articles, and we want them to be placed like this in a row, and we want them to have the same height regardless of what the length of text is. So for example, this text is longer than the first and the second, but the elements still can inherit the same height. And this is pretty simple and easy to achieve in Flexbox. So the Flex model. The Flex model consists of 2 axes. As you may know, there is the x-axis and the like the y-axis. And if we if we want to place all elements in a row, the x-axis becomes the main axis, and the secondary axis becomes the cross-axis. So these are the main terms in the Flexbox model. So if we have a column container, then this axis becomes the main one, and this one becomes the secondary. So which one has more priority? It depends on what type of container we have. So either it's a column or it's a row. And we also have flex container, so the main element which contains all other smaller elements. And we have our flex items, which are our flex the elements of the container. We have the main start and main end, and cross start, cross end. So here, this is main starts the start of the main axis, same with main end, and same with cross start and cross end. Let's take a look at it closer. And also take a look at our properties that we can write for the parent element. So the first main property is called flex direction. By defining the flex direction, we define the main axis. In more simple words, we define what our container will be, if it will be a column of elements or a row of elements. And the values can be just simple, like row or column, or we can also use row reverse or column reverse. This means that our elements go in the opposite order. So not like first, second, third, fourth, but vice versa, first, second, third, and fourth. And same with column and column reverse. Another property is called flex wrap, and it means that it mostly is used with the flex direction row, because our columns can be infinite and our rows are dependent on the width of our screen. So if the screen ends, for example, here, we have a question what we should do with next elements that come after this one. And if we put the no wrap property here, it means that they will try to fit in one row. So will be like 1, 2, 3, 4, then here 5, 6, 7, and they would shrink to fit the width of the screen. And if we put the wrap property here, it means that they won't be added to the same line. Instead, the next line would start, the next row, and the next element will be here. Wrap reverse works just like wrap, but it changes the order of the items. So it would be like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Flex flow unites previous properties. So we can just, instead of writing two properties, flex direction column, flex wrap wrap, we just write one property, flex flow column wrap. So it combines these two properties. Another property is called justify content. And this one defines the alignment along the main axis. So for example, here is our container, and these are our elements. They are smaller in the sum of their widths. They are smaller than the container, the whole container, and there is a question: where should we put them? So the flex start value means that we put them on the left hand side. So this will be the first element, second, third, and all the rest of the container will be an empty space. For the flex and property value of justified content property, we could use send them to the right hand side, just like this. But they won't change the order, so it will be like 1, 2, 3. But they will be sent to the right. Center, they're put in the center. Space between, they are so the first element is sent to the left hand side, the last one is sent to the right hand side, and all other elements share the space between them. So the space is divided equally. So here is an empty space, and here is also an empty space. Space around and space evenly are quite similar. It's just the difference is that, for example, for space evenly, we have our three elements which are like distributed equally in the container. So here we have some width of space. Here is the same width, here is the same, and here the same. And for space around, here is like one fraction, and half a fraction. So the proportion is a little bit different. Align items property is the one that we use to properly place items along the cross axis. So here they are placed in a row, and here is our main axis like this, and this one is the cross axis. So it tells us how we should send them to the top top side of the container, or to the bottom, or to the center, or stretch them across the container so they will take all its height, or the baseline value. It means that if we have some text in these elements, then they will be aligned by the first line of this text. Align content is quite similar to align items, but the difference is that it places elements. If, for example, if we have multiple rows in our container, we set the value of how we place these rows inside it. So how rows are distributed, whether they are sent to the top or to the bottom or in the center, or they will be stretched and take the equal amount of space, or the space will be the empty space will be calculated to match the space between or space around values, just like in the previous properties. We can also set gaps between elements. For example, here we can set a gap of 10 pixels, or here we can set a gap of 30 pixels if we have multiple rows. So this value will it will match both the gap between rows and columns, or we can just like here put two values, 10 pixels, 20 pixels, which mean the row gap, so this one, and the column gap, this distance between columns. Or we can also set both values, gap or row gap and column gap. So yeah, this and this value combines these two properties in one. So this is all that we have for the Flex container. Do you have any questions before we switch to the children's properties? Okay, so if you don't have any questions, let's proceed. And let's move on to the Flexbox properties for the children. The first property that we use is called order. So by default, Flex items are laid out in the source order. It means that, for example, if we take a look at the HTML and the Flex elements are written one by one, like first, second, third, and fourth. So this is the order in which they will be displayed. However, we can change this order, and for example, if we have 5 elements.
Excuse me. Excuse me. I have a question in a comment. Yeah. I have a type a comment. So we should
Flexbox with it doesn't matter what it can be applied to both. If you set width in percent, or you can set width in pixels, it doesn't matter. It works with both types of both units.
Because I see Flexbox have different width and look like the width have like a per percent of flex of flex flex item have a width percent of the flex uh, in your parent, yeah, like that.
No, it doesn't matter. It can be in percent or in pixels. It will work in both ways.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to the order. And yeah, by default, all the order of all flex elements equals to 0. And if you add a positive value uh, to any elements, any element, it can be sent to the right, so to the end of the container, or to the start of the container. So for example, here, these elements have the order, the priority of 1, so they go first. And this element has an order of 2. So even if if we look at the HTML documents, HTML document, and it is in HTML placed here, then we change its order, and it will be sent to the right hand side. And this element has the order of 3, so it has it is sent to the end, so this order is more than 2 and more than 1. And here we see that this one, this element has a negative value, and it is sent to the left hand side, to the start of the Flex container. It works also with columns. So if we set an order of 99 to any element, it will be sent to the end of the container. The flex grow property is by default as well. It as well equals to 0 for each element, and by default, all elements share the same width. But if we set a flex grow of which is a flex grow value which is bigger than that of any other element, for example, like here. Here, each element has a flex grow property of 1, and here this element has flex grow property which value equals to 2. So it will take up twice as much as space as than one of the others. So it will grow in width. And here, negative numbers are invalid. So not like in the order property. Same with flex shrink. So flex shrink is a property that is by default is 1. But if we set it to a bigger number, like 3 or 2, it will become smaller, and like it works in the opposite way as flex grow. The flex basis property defines the default size of an element. Before we put any flex shrink or flex grow properties, it can be set in percent or in rem units or in pixels, or we can use a keyword, the auto keyword, which means take a look at the width or height property. And we can also put a content keyword, which means the size that the size is based on the content. Yeah, so it can also be set to 0, and there is in this case there will be no extra spaces around the content, and it can be it is mostly used in combination with the flex grow and flex shrink property. So for example, here we can see that we have the shorthand for these three properties: the flex grow, flex shrink, and flex basis. Flex shrink and flex basis parameters are optional, so default is 0, 1 auto. But you can also use flex grow property like just by itself. I can tell you that flex grow and flex shrink are probably rarely used. We mostly use width of elements. So we just put the width property in percent or pixels. Or if we need some element to take the whole space. So for example, one element inside a container has some value for width, another one, and for the third element we have we wanted to take all the rest of the space. So that is when we use the flex grow property. But for flex shrink and flex basis, I can tell you that it's not that common as flex grow. And also we can align. We can use align self and align self property for the elements to make an element align itself individually. So for example, we set the align items property to flex start for the container, but we want just one element from the container to be moved to the end. And we put an align self property and set it to flex end, and it will be sent to the end of the container. So this is pretty much everything that I wanted to tell you about the Flexbox. Maybe you have any questions.
I see on the screen on the slide about flex basis. I see that in the final line. I see that if set flex basis to 0, there is extra space around content isn't factor. So what is the extra space around content?
Okay, let's take a look. I would say that this means that just a moment. Let me show you. So for example, we have a div with class of container. And here we have a couple of paragraphs. X direction row. And for the paragraph, it will be let's let it be 40%. Better space around. Okay, so let it be class of let's grow to let's put it to 1. So in this case, this one will always equal 40%, and this one will take all the rest of the space. If we make it equal to 0, example. So as you may see, in this case, this one equals to 0, and this one takes the rest of the space. Just a moment. Or if we put the hotel. Sorry, it's the flex basis property. Flex basis 0, or flex basis auto. Let me just check it, and maybe I will come back with an answer later if you don't mind. So I see that this is like a different behavior. So yeah, space is 0, flex space is auto. So this one is the default. And just a second, if set to 0, yeah, so it's extra space isn't factored in. Yeah, so you may see the behavior, or yeah, if you don't mind, I will come back later and explain what's going on here.
Yes, it's okay.
Yeah. Sorry that I don't have a quick answer for that. Okay, any other questions? Yeah, I see a question. If we have item 5, but in Flexbox have 4 or 6 flex items, what will happen? Can you just you mean item 5 is a property, or what property do you mean?
I asked my question is about item previous slide, yeah. Previous slide.
Flexbox.
Item 5, order 5, yeah. I wrong. I mistake. I'm sorry. I mean, if we have five flash item, but order is 4 or 6, is so what will happen? Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't matter how many items we have. It just compares the numbers. So for example, here we have only 3 elements, which have the order of 2, 2, and 99. So we don't have 99 elements. And our Flex container, it will just compare these values, and these two will be placed according to their order in HTML, and this one will be sent to the end of the Flex container, because 99 is just more than 2. So it doesn't mean that it is like the 99th element of the container. It means that this order is bigger than the order of all the other elements.
So I still don't understand what order element is what
Okay, let me just show you. So for example, we have a container and we have a paragraph of 1. Just a moment. Paragraph of 2. This will be class first, second, and this one 3. Okay, so let it be container display flex.
yeah, flash.
Justify content space found, and paragraph. Oh, sorry. B. Some background color, example like this, or padding 10 pixels. Okay, so we see 3 elements. 1, 2, 3. We can add an order. So by default, the order of this element is 0, the order of this element is 0, and of this one is 0 as well. But we can change the order of elements. For example, we can take the 3rd element and we can give it an order of -1. So now we see that -1 is less than 0. So they will go in this way: -1, 3rd element, 0, 0, 0, 0. And So if we can make it like -100, -1000, it doesn't matter. So this one, as long as this order is less than 0, this element will go first. For example, if we take this second element and set the order, of minus, which will be more, like this, then we see that this element is placed here. Less, then it will be 3, then 2 with -100, and 1 with 0. And it works in completely the same way to the positive side. So, for example, we can take the second element and give it the order of, let it be 2. And we see that it will be 0, 0, and 2. So 2 is more than 0, and it will go like 0, 0, 2. That's why it is last. So like this, it can be 2, it can be to 20, to 100, to 1000, etc. It will be, as long as it is more than 0, it will be the last in a row. Okay, is it clear now? So it doesn't matter how many items we have here.
I understand, like mark like a count number of element of a item.
Yeah. Yeah, like this. Okay, any other questions?
I have a question on Flexbox. Like, how do we make all flex item have the equal size?
By default, they all have, well, they have the same size. So it's like here, for example, or we can make it like flex 1. So if we set the flex grow to 1, they will share the equal space. So by default.
But I see that Flexbox just ensure that we share the remaining space. So in case if we have the next item with different width, I think it will work different.
Yeah, so for example, we can set yeah, like this, for example, we can set the flex grow, or for example, width. Let it be 30%. Oh, sorry, 30%. Like this. Or, for example, for the third element, it will be flex grow. So it will be 30, 30, and 1, or for example, this one maybe more descriptive, like it will be 20%, 20%, and all the rest.
So do we have any way to make every flex item have the same width?
Set the same flex grow. So like
In case the thirds have different width, like width 10%.
Yeah, so we can okay, do you mean like here, for example, every item has the same width, so it will be flex grow 1?
Yes.
And the third item 10%. Like this. I'm not sure. I guess we can use flex spaces. No. In this case, I would give it this value or width. Yeah, so I will make it this way, like set the flex grow to 0. So it won't be the same as number 1 and number 2, and the width of 10%. So it will be 10% in any way, and these two will will share the other space.
Yeah, so it means if we want to equal sign, we should set the flex row equal to flex item.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's clear to me now.
Yeah. Okay. Have any more questions? If no, then we can take a break. I would say then probably is 10 minutes enough? Is it okay? So now it's 7:24. So it's 7:30, 34, 35. Let's meet here. Okay, so yeah, I will wait for you. I'm sorry for the delay. So let's proceed. I hope everybody's back.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah.
Oh, no, nothing. Yeah.
Okay. So let me share my screen again. In the second part of our today's lecture, we will talk about the CSS grid, the new technology that has come in recent years as an alternative to the Flexbox layout. And let me tell you a little bit more about it. Honestly, I haven't worked much with this technology, and I can say that it's not very commonly used in our production projects because the functionality that Flexbox provides is in most cases enough to create a layout. However, Grid is a more complicated technology, and it can be supported by all modern browsers. So some projects also use it. So we will also talk about what this technology is and what properties it provides for the parent element and for the child element. And we will also talk about some special units and functions that we use here. So the CSS grid is a two-dimensional layout system. It can be described as a table or as a matrix of elements. So if in Flexbox we have two axes, between which one is the main axis and the second one is a cross axis. In the grid layout, both axes are have the same priority. So both are equally important. So we could say that both axes can be considered as main axis. And here we can create different combinations of elements, so we can send them wherever we want to. So for example, this orange element can be set to the end or to the top left corner of the container, or for example here, and we can manipulate these elements as we want. Here is the definition of what the grid layout is. And here in this picture, we can see the browser support. As I said, it is supported by most modern browsers. In the Internet Explorer version 11, it can be supported with polyfills. So polyfills is a special tool that you use to convert the modern type of code into the old technology. With Internet Explorer, you can use it if you use a polyfill, but for all other browsers, you can use it freely, and it will work. The terminology for grids is the following. We as with the Flexbox, we have our grid container, so the big elements that big element that contains all other elements. We have a grid item and a grid cell. The difference is that the grid cell is how to say this, the unit of this table or this matrix, so like a part of the grid container, and the grid item is the element, the child element itself, so it can be either text or image, so it can fit the grid cell or it can be smaller. The grid line is the line that divides cells, and we can define its width or height. I will explain you later how we can do that, but it's like this divider. We also have a grid track, so it can be either a row or a column, and a grid area. It is a square of grid cells. 2 on 2, 3 on 3, doesn't matter how many grid cells it contains, but it should always be a square element. So for example, yeah, here is 2 on 2. And let's take a look for the properties for the parent element or the grid container. Same as with Flex, it can be set to a grid or an inline grid. The difference is that the container itself can behave as a block or as an inline element. Inline block, I mean, but as it is a grid container, then it is specified here. We can set the grid template columns and grid template rows values, and this example is not pretty good, but here we put all the values in width that we use divided by a space. So, for example, here on this page, we can see that we set grid template columns, one fraction, and one fraction. It means that we have a container of 2 equal parts. What one fraction means, we will also talk about later, but mostly it's like one part of an element. So for example, if it would be 2 fractions, 1 and 1, the container would be divided into 4 parts, 4 equal parts, and this child element would take 2 cells, this one 1, and this one also 1. We can also set these values as in absolute units. For example, here these are pixels, and we can give names to these areas, to these columns as well. And we can also use the repeat property. Let me just show you an example. So for example, here in our container element, let's change it. So let's make it no more a Flexbox. Instead, it will be a grid element. Display grid. Grid template. Example 100 pixels. One. Oh, okay. So let it be just 100 pixels. Maybe we can set all three, like one. No, sorry. Yeah, 100 pixels, 200 pixels, and 350 pixels. So we see that this element, the first one, takes 100 pixels, this one takes 200 pixels, and this one takes 50 pixels. So that is how these columns are defined. Same with rows. We can also by default all these values equal to auto. Sorry. Or we can also set values to rows as well. So for example, here we can start, can add, for example, fourth element, or we can just let it be 100 pixels as well. Or we can set it to auto. Sorry. So this is what goes by default. Yeah, we can also define the grid template areas, and we can give names to these elements. So, for example, here we can give an area, for example, name header, and it will be like header, 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 header. Then it will be a main, like main and main, and for the sidebar it will be another area, and here the empty space is divided by a dot, and a footer will also be defined as a footer, and for the child element we will give it a property of grid area name. So for example, this one, if it is a header, the child element will have a property of grid area name of header. So this is how we tie the container and the child. And we can unite all these properties and write them in one property of grid template which will be written in this way, like the name of the area, the width. So it can combine all the other properties as well. So this writing is a little bit more complicated. And we can also set a gap between these elements. So it can be a column gap or a row gap. For example, 10 or 15 pixels, which we can also set here. And we can justify our content or align it within the grid cell. So for example, here is our grid item and here is our grid cell. So we can align it to the left, to the right, or in the middle, or stretch in 2 dimensions, so vertically and horizontally. Completely the same as in the Flexbox. And we can also justify our content within the container. So it can be sent to the left, to the right as well. Same with the align content property. So the whole content inside the container can be sent to the top or to the bottom of the container, or the space can be distributed evenly between, or as well space around it, space between properties can be used. And we can also combine all the properties that we described above in the property called grid. So they will go like this: grid template rows, grid template columns, grid template areas, rows, outer rows, outer columns. So you can write all these properties into one property of grid. But honestly, I don't recommend you doing that, because it can be easy to get confused with it. So I would recommend writing all these properties separately. So the examples are shown here. So for example, if you define grid template rows of 100 pixels and 300 pixels, and grid template columns of 3 fractions and 1 fraction, it can be written in this shorthand like this. Same here, grid outer flow, outer rows or columns can be written like this. So this is how the short properties look like. Okay, so before we switch to the children elements, do you have any questions on the grid containers?
I have a question. I have a question about the code you write in the JS bin.
Yeah, I was just curious, so probably you could switch it.
Yeah, I'm
like
thinking
this.
we are 3 column and 1 row, but I don't know why it don't work.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure this out. Rows. Maybe it will be auto pixels.
So in the property like grid template column and grid template row, the width we write in this is also mean the number of column, right?
So it is like here it is so they should follow the pattern. I mean, like match the number of of elements. So here, if we have 3 elements, like 1, 2, 3, we should have 3 properties here. So they should the number of elements here should match the number of values here. I guess I haven't put the semicolon here, so probably that's why it's.
So can we write? Can we draw a 4-column, but we just have 3 read item?
Oh yeah, so now it works. Yeah, so here it's, yeah, you mean, can we add a new column or
Yeah, more column than the read item we have.
more column, like to add some code here or here?
In the read template column, maybe we can add more width.
Like this? So
Yes.
it just won't work. But if we add a new item here, then I guess it will. So yeah, it will behave in the same way as for example, had it be 100, sorry, 100. So yeah, in this case, it will work. But if there is no element, then this last property will just not apply because it doesn't have an element to be applied to.
Yeah.
But if we have, for example, if we don't have this property, like this, and we put another element here, let's see, it will just be thrown out of the container. So now it will stay in the container, but it will be, how to say, it will start with the next row, but it will fit. So it will fit this width of, so the row goes like this. I mean, the row is like 100, 250. And this element, this new element will fit the width of the first element in a row. But as we have defined only one row, one height, then the height won't be applied to this element. But if we write 100 pixels, for example, here, then it will have 100 pixels. So it's a little bit complicated. And we can.
The last time you say that on the reduction project, we mostly use Flex. So
I don't know. I haven't seen a lot of grids used in the production products. That's just, I'm not sure. That's my personal statistics. But probably you will, but I cannot guarantee that you won't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So any the risk has any use case like we have to use it to build something like that?
I guess how to say? I'm just trying to remember the cases where the Flexbox cannot be applied. So mostly when the Flexbox cannot be applied, then we use grids. But well, just now I just cannot remember any examples of how this can be done. So probably something related to the order of elements. So for example, like here, if we completely change the structure of the layout depending on the screen width, but I don't know. Mostly we use flex boxes, but as I said, I cannot guarantee you that like 100% that your project won't use grid layout. But I guess if you have to work with them, then you can easily open documentation and find all these properties and refresh this knowledge. I'm just here we're just highlighting the properties, the terms that you will have to look for if you have to work with grid layouts. So you just remember what these properties are and quickly refresh this knowledge. Okay, so do you have any?
Yeah. Can we use grid for one dimension layout?
Yeah, sure, just like Flexbox.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure if you really need to do this. Okay, so
can I have a
yeah,
question?
yeah, sure.
Yeah, my question does not directly relate to this one, but like because I have just recovered from my illness, so my knowledge from the previous lectures have some lack of. But like I have a question about I see that in HTML that we use a lot. We use class name,
Mhm.
and I see that the people use multiple class names, and they separate them by space, and I do not. I cannot get the point or like the purpose of to.
Oh, um, cannot hear you. Can anybody hear this Tran?
Maybe some problem about connection. I can't hear.
Okay, I hope she'll come back to us. Okay, I will probably ask. I will probably answer this question later in the chat because if Miss Tran, if you hear us, yeah.
Yeah, some loss of connection.
Yeah.
Can I ask it again, or we continue?
Yeah, sure.
All right. So my problem is like when we have the class name for HTML elements, I see that people use a lot of class names and separate them by space. I do not see the purpose of doing that. And can you explain it? And once we have multiple class name like that, how should we style them with CSS? Yeah.
Have you seen the previous lecture about the CSS methodologies?
I have just reviewed it, and I still do not have really clear knowledge about that. So yeah.
Yeah, so the point is that by using the combination of classes, you get your HTML code more structured. And if you use multiple classes, you can, well, for example, you have, I don't know, some elements that share the same styling, and some of the elements that are slightly different. So for example, you have 5 headings in your document. So they all have the same styling. They have the font size, they have the same font size, font family, font weight, etc. But for example, one of them is of different color. So for example, all these headings are red and one of them is green. Then it makes sense to create a separate class for all the headings, like a common one, and write there such properties as font size, font value, etc. And a separate class that will define just one of them with different state, and write there the property of color. And also you can divide such things as alignment, or for example, some elements can also, if they are reused across the page, like the headings that I mentioned, for example, they can share the same styles, but they can be aligned differently in the parts of the page where they are used. So that's what we need multiple classes for.
Yeah, thank you. But and I see that yeah, so I get the point of using multiple class names, like they have some common styles, and they also have some unique style that they wanna have
Yeah.
their own CS, right? But I see in some case we also have the parent element and the child element contain the same class name. So when it affects our CS style, if we
Uh,
start the parent one and with kind of same class name, and will it affect the CSS of the child one?
if it is a completely equal class name, that it will affect.
The class name of child is inside the parent one, but the parent one contains more class names. So
Uh,
like the child element, for example, contains the class name A, and the parent also contains A, but also B.
I guess, well, I don't see any point of using this, because honestly, I haven't seen this in the production code, so I'm not sure if it's a good practice to give the same class for the parent and the child element. So I would I would recommend dividing them instead, so giving different class names.
Yeah, so I see this problem because when I complete the homework, as I said, I have just recovered from the illness and I have just started to work on it. But I see that in the HTML class name, yeah, so I see some confusion. Like the child element and also the parent elements share the same class name. So I asked about it. How should we CS that? But yeah, so that is also the first time I see it, but outside the homework, I do not see that. So yeah, I asked about it because of this confusion.
Yeah, I guess it would be better if you change it and give them completely different class names.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions? Okay, so let's proceed with children elements of the grid. So they also have their own properties. We can define the grid column start, grid column and grid row start and grid row and properties for the child element. And these properties, they specify at which column or which row this element starts. So auto is the default value, so they go by their order, like in our example in the JSBin. Or we can specify it, so we can write it like this. For example, item A, we have a grid layout like this, and we can specify a grid column start with the column 2, so it will take the column 2, and we can specify grid column end, which will be 5. We can write it with a number or a word, like here. Just a moment. So yeah, it will be two. This will be 5. So it will go here, this divider. And grid row start as well. It will go here and it will end here. And it goes also with the line number or line name, as I said you in the beginning of this presentation. Let me just come back. So here we can give names to our numbers, and we can give, for example, the name first or line 2 or line 3. So these are our lines. And here we can also define where our columns or rows start. So for example, if we start with the first line, our column will start here, and for example, end with the column for start. So it will be here. So it will take these columns. Let me come back. So yeah, this is how it works. Same with item B, grid column start 1, this one, and this span column for start, and row start 2, row number 2, and here. Span in this case means that it will span across these two rows. So for example, here it will take, so it will start with the row number 2 and take 2 rows, like 1 and 2. We can also list them. So list these two properties into one shorthand properties. So instead of grid column start and grid column end, we can write just grid column and write two properties in one, and the same for grid row. Grid area combines the four of the above, so we can define row start, row end, and column end. So four properties instead, like one property instead of four. And just like justify content and align content, and just like we do this in the Flexbox model, we can justify and align the content inside a single grid cell. So like this, align self and justify self, it aligns content here. Place self is a combination of the two. So it combines the align self and justify self properties, and it can also place the content inside a grid cell. So for example, here it is center, which means center and both center and center. And for the item A here, it means center. So the align self means center, and the justify self means stretch. So it is stretched in the grid cell. We can also use special units, as for example, I showed you the unit of FR or fraction. This is a unit which is used only in the grid model. So one fraction means a portion of the remaining space. So for example, here, if we see grid template columns, we see one fraction and three fractions. And this means that the grid, the container will be divided into 4 columns, and the first element in the grid layout will take 1 column, and the second element will take 3 columns. So yeah, the loosely 25% to 75%. So one element will take 25% and another one will take 75. We also have other special units like 50 pixels. We can combine pixels, fractions, and we also have such units as mean content. And let's take a look what this property means. So yeah, all the lengths like pixels, rams, percents, they also work here. And the mean content property, mean content value means the minimum size of the content. So here we have an example of a text like the very long hot dog, and the content will have the width of the shortest word. The max content will be the maximum content of this phrase. So in this case, it will be like the whole phrase, the whole sentence. Auto is like a fraction unit. So it's more like a default value. Fit content, it's goes between the min content and the max content. So mostly it fits the size of what's inside. And fractional units, we already discussed them. We also have different functions that can be used inside the grid layout. So the one of them is the min-max function, which means that the width of this grid cell fits the content, but the minimum width of it is 100 pixels and the maximum is one fraction. We also have these functions used separately, the minimum or the maximum. So here it's more like a range. And the last useful function is the repeat function. So we can, for example, imagine if we have 8 columns, one fraction each. So we can write them like this, one fraction, etc. Or we can use the function repeat, and the first argument is how many columns we have. So in this case, we have 8 columns and the width of each column. So here it is one fraction. We can also use the min-max function here. So it will be either 10 pixels or one fraction or everything that goes inside. And we can also use for the first argument, we can also use such values as auto-fit and auto-fill, which means we can create as many possible columns as it's possible in a row, or as many possible columns as it's possible to fit into this space. So these values we use when we don't know how many columns we will have. And we can also create a subgrid. So the subgrid is like a grid inside a grid. So we have a grid container, and one of these children elements is a grid container itself. So this is the syntax, and this technology is only supported in Firefox right now. And so probably it's not that common yet. And here we can say a few words about the comparison between the Flexbox and the grid layout. So as I said, Flexbox has one dimension while the grid has 2 dimensions. So Flexbox can work with either rows or columns, which may seem kind of restrictive. But in fact, I would say that Flexbox probably has all the same functionality, despite the fact that it has only one dimension. Grid gives you more flexibility, so probably it's a better way to use if you just don't want to think about any order of elements, you just want to place them as you want. here we can see the content first versus layout first approaches, because it's common to think that Flexbox uses content first approach, and grid is mostly about the layout first approach. So grid, as I said, gives more flexibility for larger scale layouts. And grid is also very flexible if you want to combine different units like fractions, percents, pixels, etc. So it's easier to work with them, I would say here. However, I could say that, so here you can see all the comparison of these two technologies, but however, grid is very functional. It is very like a very flexible, functional technology. I would say that Flexbox is still more widely used than grid, but it's better to know them both. Okay, so that's all from my side for today. Maybe any questions?
I have a question on the fraction unit. It say that it's based on the remaining space, but why don't just say the space of grid container, but this use the word remaining? I can't distinguish.
Yeah, so for example, let's check on our example. So for example, it will be like this: one fraction, one fraction, one fraction. So here we declare that all the width of the container will be divided into 3 fractions, and they will be equal among each other. So it's like 1, 1, 1, like 33% each. Let's change this one, for example, for 2. Here we see that this is 25%, 25%, and 50%. So this works pretty much like if we compare to Flex. So it will be like Flex grow 1, Flex grow 1 to each element, and here it would be Flex grow 2.
Yeah, but I see that it's still based on the size of container.
Yeah,
So,
sure.
so but in the slide it's right, the remaining space. Why they use the word remaining space?
Remaining space, I mean, the remaining space, it is like, okay, so let's probably make it this way. So for example, this one would be 50 pixels. And let it be 1 fraction and 1 fraction. So this one is 50 pixels, right? And this one is the remaining space, which would be shared equally between the other 2 columns. So probably this example is more descriptive.
Yeah, right. This example, like can solve my problem.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so yeah, the remaining space is the space that is not defined in pixels or percents or anything like that. So this one would be divided on fractions. Okay, any more questions? Okay, so if you don't have any questions, then probably I will see you on Monday. And I remember that I owe you 2 questions, one from the previous one of the previous lectures, and also one about the flex basis that you asked today. I will try to answer them as soon as I can. Okay, so if everything's clear for today, yeah, then see you on Monday. Thank you and good luck with your homeworks, and don't forget about Irina's message about the previous homeworks and the bot that will check them on Monday.
Yeah, see you later.
Yeah, thank you. Have a nice evening. Bye bye.
Okay.